Hey RC enthusiast, RW down here in the shop. We're going to have a little RC guru talk on the bench about shocks and how to try and keep them from leaking, how to make them work right, how I can tell when they're not working right, how to do some mods to them. These are cheap shocks that I'm talking about. These are Wraith shocks. You can get a pair of 4 of them for like 20 bucks off of eBay. And what I like about them is that they're pretty darn sturdy and they work okay, and they're cheap to replace because I beat stuff up. I would hate to be destroying $100 shocks. As you can see how they work, they have a spring and they have a damping system inside. And to get the spring off, you just push that up and you take the cup off, take the spring off, and then you have your shock body. Well, let's take a look at one that I've taken apart. You've got a cap with a diaphragm that seals the top. You've got a shock collar, which you may or may not need. The bottom unscrews with a 10mm wrench. It's got a little O-ring that seals it, and you've got a piston which has different number of holes in it. This one has 2 tiny holes in it. It's held with a washer, a nylock nut on the shaft, and that's pretty much it. When you want to take these apart and do things to them, make them stop leaking, where they're going to be leaking from is the bottom, and the parts that are inside are an O-ring. You got a little removable cap. You see how I pop that off? It just snaps off gently. An O-ring, a plastic spacer, another O-ring. Okay. And what you do is you clean everything really well. Clean it all up. Clean it really good. And then when you're reassembling it, you slather everything, all the O-rings, the inside of that, everything, with green slime. And you just slime it up. I'm running out of slime. Get some slime on the inside of it, and I use the long nose of this tube to swoggle it around. I clean off one of these O-rings really well. These have been recently rebuilt, so now I put some green slime on the O-ring itself, right, especially in the center. Push it in the hole. Okay, make sure the spacer is clean. Push it in the hole. Okay, so now I got a O-ring, a little black plastic spacer. I'll put a little more green slime on that. Push that in the hole. Okay, and you cap it off. Okay, so there's your little cartridge. And what I'm going to do as a mod is I'm going to put a tiny little clipping from a clicky ballpoint pen spring. See? Just fits right over that shaft. Not all springs will fit over these shafts. That seems to fit pretty nice. Take the washers, if I can pick them up. And put on a washer, put on a piston, put on a washer, put on a nylock nut. Now for this particular test, I'm not going to go all the way down with the nylock nut, just enough to keep it from falling off. I'll just do that by twisting the end, but there's a flat on the shaft right under here that you can grip it with a pair of pliers. But that's on there pretty good. Okay, so now I can test how this travels up in this shaft, and we'll get to see how putting a spring on the inside affects the overall dynamic. Okay, so first of all, I've lost some travel for sure, and it's forced it into, in a sense of droop. It's forced it to be shorter, but it has a little bit to give, and we'll see how well the spring overcomes that by putting. We can start off by putting a. I'm going to put this one on because this is the spring I actually want to run. So let's. I'm going to test with I'm doing this right now. I've never tested it before, so I'm just testing it now. So here's my little low-C mini T spring in there. I'm not really sure how much that's going to affect it. What I wanted to do is I wanted to lower the ride height a little bit all the time, but have the option for a little bit of extension. So now what I need to do is see where I'm at. I can do that by just measuring. We'll measure, it doesn't have to be exact. I don't have to put the eyes in, but right now I'm at about, looks like 97. Okay, so I'm guessing that when this thing is fully extended, I'll be pretty close to 100. Let's see if I can measure that. Yeah, I'm right at about 100, so I've lost 5 millimeters. Okay, so the amount of spring that's bound up in there is causing it to stop 5 millimeters early, which isn't a bad thing. They're overly long shocks. And then it's not going to change. When it's compressed, what happens is this takes up some room, so I'm going from a total of 100 to 80, so I've reduced my overall stroke 10 millimeters. This normally has a 30 millimeter stroke. So here's a stock one. When it's all the way open, it's 105, and when it's all the way closed, it should be 70. Let's see if I'm right. 75. Yeah, 75. So it's 30 millimeters of travel here in a stock one. And now we've gone to 20 millimeters. Probably more like, really, because you very rarely, I don't think it's ever going to go that way. You've just basically put a limiter inside. You could also put a little piece of fuel line inside if you wanted to limit it. So ride height is more like 95 now instead of 105, so I've dumped the whole ride height 10 millimeters. But it has the option, sort of, to come out a little bit. These pistons come off of here. You have to trim them extremely carefully and try not to gouge them or whatever. So what I'm going to show you now is how you get them full of oil and basically complete the build. So we'll try it out with this little weird spring on the inside and just see what happens. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little bit of slime. Trying to get it to come out. I'm almost out. Put a little bit of slime on that O-ring. Okay. And put that baby right in there. Okay, and I'm going to cinch it down. You can do it finger tight, but it is, made so you could keep it a little snug with the wrench. I wouldn't go crazy with it, that's for sure. Okay, good time to wipe all the slime and stuff off the outside. Now what will be really handy right about now would be have a little shock holder. All you need to do is drill some holes in a piece of wood and you can set them up right, and then you could have your hands free, but I'm going to demonstrate this. It's no big deal. This is 35 weight silicone shock oil. First thing I want to do is make sure that it moves smoothly up and down the bore. Okay. We're just going to go ahead and fill it up. As a matter of fact, I'm going to pop this off because it takes too long for those droppers to do it. I'm going to try and do it at an angle you can see. And I basically fill it almost up to the top, but not quite. Okay, so I am almost up to the top there. When I pulled it down like that, past the spring, I lost a whole ton of it because it basically pumped through those little holes in the piston and it dropped. Alright, I'm almost up to the top again. This time I want to come all the way up, all the way down. I'm going to stroke it a couple times and hopefully any bubbles that are below will start to come up. Now you got to leave room for that little diaphragm at the top of the cap, but you don't want to leave too much room. What I like to do is I like to overfill it a little bit so everything gushes out. It's messy. That's just how I do it. Okay. Then you put the diaphragm cap on it. Make sure that's a beautiful thing. Get that sealed down on it. finger tight, but not crazy tight, because you can cut the diaphragm, or if your diaphragm is not perfectly installed, then you'll get a leak at the top. But if the diaphragm is properly installed, it shouldn't leak at the top. Now when you push the shock in, if you see it starting to do this thing, that's because there's air trapped inside here. You can actually feel the turgent kind of through it. So what I do is, this is the point where I crack this open. So I hold it at a slight angle, and once it gets to a certain amount of openness, you can push any air bubbles out of there. When you close it again, you'll have less rise, but you can't get rid of all of it. The only way to get rid of all of it that I've found is you leave the shock open for a while and you let the air come out. But if you're in a hurry, like I am, I'm always in a hurry when I do this. I have limited playtime. Now I got it to close. I'm going to open it all the way. I've got my little spring action inside. Got a little bit of an air bubble still. It'll eventually work its way out with the oil, because these leak, like I said. And what you want to look for at this time, you have to try and get everything super clean. And just look and see if you're pushing oil past the cap, because that means you got the cap on wrong, and you can save yourself a lot of trouble now by taking it off and putting it back on again. Okay, last thing to do, put on the shock, cup. I got my little short spring in here. Let's see how that works for me. It's definitely doing some damping. I don't see oil gushing out of everything. Alright then. So that's filling a shock with oil. I'm not saying that's the best way, the only way. It's just the way I do it, because I'm always in a hurry. I just want to get my stuff back together. Okay, I've got the shocks all rebuilt with a little internal spring mod. Everything changed out, actually all 4 of my cylinders, because they were all worn. I happen to have 4 shocks I hardly use, so I just rebuilt everything. And what the little limiters have done, because I'll be losing 5 millimeters of travel off of each shock, is with my shocks in the home position. I think you can see that that's pretty much exactly a 45-degree angle, and what that does with this wheelbase is that it puts you right about at a tire height, which is about ideal, I think, for articulation, about 1 tire height. You can go a little higher, a little lower, whatever you like. The shocks have a nice smooth action. Now, before they were binding, because the bore was warped or scratched or something. And what I do when I'm looking at tuning, okay, so just pick the crawler up and diagonally twist it and look at the 2 opposing shocks and see if they reach coil bind at the same time. When I've done that, I know that I'm pretty much balanced, and I can move from that point. I can make the back shocks more upright, or the front shocks more laid down, or whatever I think will work better. But at this point, I've got even bind. Everything moves freely, everything moves smoothly, and for the next 3 or 4 batteries, it won't leak very much. The last thing to note, I guess, would be ride height. Now, from here to here on my hand is about 95, 96 millimeters, and I find that that is a really good, when you push it down and it comes back up, push it all the way down, let it come all the way back up. If you put your hand under it, that's where I like to be. I know some people like to ride a little lower, a little more droop. You can do that with softer springs or different shocks. There's different ways to do it. And then full up, when I'm holding it full up, you can see I got about another 10 millimeters of clearance. So I'm about 105 full up. I'm about 90 something droop, and then full down. The way I like my full down is I try and get my, see if I can look through the camera and see if you can see what I'm seeing. I like to get my axles. If I line my two axles up, I want to just barely see my skid. I don't see a lot of reason to get lower than that. From all the testing and crawling I've done, to have the crawler move even lower than that, it just seems like it hangs up and you can't get over things. As it is now, I'm going to have good ability to get over things. I've got a pretty good vertical sense of balance, as you can see. You know, you can see that I've got it just, let me get it so you can really see the wheels. You know, it's pretty good balance on its side. The chassis is lighter now, so you can see I can even poke at it. And it doesn't want to tip over. I've got a lot of caster on it, which seems to work really good for climbing. The next thing I'm going to do, now that I got the shocks sorted, is I'm going to go out and test it. But I need to rebuild the front, and I got another big bearing gearbox because I keep tearing up the little bearings. Not as much with the front as the back, but definitely tearing it up, so I thought it was just time. And I also ordered some more replacement bearings for the big bearings so that I can rebuild the back and get everything brand new again. But I'll go out and do a little crawling first. I can always rebuild it after it gets dark. But I like how it's moving now. It was all bound up before. You know, I've been doing a lot of abusive crawling, so shocks are a consumable item and you got to rebuild them. Thanks for watching, guys. Let's get out on the rocks, give this thing a go.